The sea was quiet that morning, unusually quiet for a war that had torn the Pacific apart. As dawn settled over the narrow waters north of New Guinea, a thin veil of mist drifted across the convoy's decks. Japanese sailors stood at their posts, some adjusting binoculars, others warming their hands against the chill wind rolling in from the Bismarck Sea. They had made this run before. They believed they understood these waters, believed that discipline, doctrine, and the Imperial Japanese Navy's hard-earned confidence would carry them safely to Leh. What none of them could see in that pale morning light was the shape of a new kind of warfare forming just beyond the horizon. Thousands of miles away in makeshift Australian workshops, American mechanics had taken a familiar aircraft and reshaped it into something unrecognizable. Soon, a line of B-25 Mitchells would skim the waves at a height no doctrine accounted for, carrying a kind of firepower no convoy had trained to withstand. And as the fleet pressed on, unaware of the storm moving toward them, a question lingered in the air unseen and unanswered. What happens when a force built on tradition meets an enemy built on reinvention? Long before the first American aircraft appeared over the horizon, the fate of the convoy had been set in motion by the brutal logic of the Pacific War. New Guinea, with its jungled ridges and choking humidity, had become one of the most contested battlegrounds in 1943. For Japan, holding Leh meant holding a foothold that could still threaten Allied lines. For the soldiers of the 51st Division, it meant survival. Their commanders had promised that reinforcements would arrive by sea, and the Imperial Japanese Navy assured them the route was secure. From Rabaul, the convoy pushed southward. 8 transports carrying 6,900 men, ammunition, medical supplies, and the precious equipment needed to keep Leh from collapsing. 8 destroyers formed a protective shell around them. It was a formation refined by years of hard fighting, and Japanese officers believed it would withstand anything the Allies attempted. The lessons of earlier victories had taught them that enemy bombers struggled to hit moving ships, and that disciplined anti-aircraft fire could shred any plane foolish enough to press in too low. Tradition and experience gave them confidence. Yet, on the other side of the Pacific War's vast front, American airmen were confronting their own crisis. High-altitude bombing against ships had proved almost useless. Even the legendary Flying Fortress struggled to land decisive hits on agile targets maneuvering across open water. Torpedo attacks demanded training and aircraft the theater did not possess. Pilots understood that if they continued fighting the way manuals prescribed, convoys like the one bound for Leh would keep slipping through. The question was not whether to change tactics, but how. That answer began to take shape in Australia, far from any official design bureau. In a row of makeshift workshops at Eagle Farm, an unorthodox mind named Paul Papygun refused to accept the limitations of conventional doctrine. Surrounded by mechanics improvising with whatever tools the field could offer, he stripped the nose of the B-25 Mitchell, removed the bombardier's position, and packed the empty space with 50 caliber machine guns. What emerged was a weapon no one had predicted, the B-25 Mitchell Strafer, capable of projecting more forward firepower than many warships in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Around the same time, pilots were refining a second innovation, skip bombing. Tested against derelict hulls near Port Moresby, the method required a bomber to race in at low altitude and release its payload so the bomb would skip across the water and strike a ship at the waterline. It demanded absolute precision, it demanded courage, but it worked, and once combined with the B-25 Mitchell Strafer, it would make the Battle of the Bismarck Sea different from anything the enemy had prepared for. By early March 1943, these experiments had become operational doctrine. American planners believed that this convoy, this moment, would prove whether innovation could overcome the weight of tradition. The first American aircraft appeared high above the convoy, shimmering in the morning haze. To the lookouts aboard the Japanese destroyers, it was a familiar sight. B-17 seconds and medium bombers settling into altitude, preparing for another predictable attack. Gun crews snapped to their posts, traversing barrels upward. Officers shouted corrections. The Imperial Japanese Navy had rehearsed this exact moment countless times. High-altitude bombers had rarely struck true, and as the first blossoms of anti-aircraft fire erupted into the sky, many believed the Battle of the Bismarck Sea would unfold like every engagement before it. But that confidence lasted only seconds. What the sailors could not see, what no doctrine had taught them to expect, was a second formation moving in from the southwest, flying so low their propellers carved twin lines of spray across the water. 13 Australian Beaufighters swept in first, their cannons already spitting fire, raking the decks of the escorts. Behind them came the shape that would redefine the Pacific War, the B-25 Mitchell Strafer. Sleek, fast, and bristling with 50 caliber guns, they raced forward like predators breaking from cover. Major Edward Larner led the first attack run. Through the cockpit glass, he could see sailors sprinting along the deck of the destroyer Shirayuki, pointing upward toward the decoy formation, still unaware of the threat screaming in at wave height. Larner held his approach until he was within 1,200 yards. Then the nose of his B-25 lit up, 8 streams of tracer fire, reaching out across the water. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Gun shields shattered. The bridge erupted in sparks and fragments. Men who had spent years training for surface engagements found themselves overwhelmed by a storm of metal they could neither track nor outshoot. Skip bombing followed in the wake of the strafing guns. 2 bombs struck the water, skipped like stones, and slammed into the hull beneath the destroyer's waterline. 5 seconds later, deep muffled explosions tore through Shirayuki's frame. As Lana pulled away, the ship was already listing, smoke boiling from ruptured compartments. Across the formation, other B-25 Mitchell strafers executed their deadly choreography. Transports packed with soldiers of the 51st Division were stripped of their defenses before bombs punched into their lower decks. The bridge of one vessel simply dissolved under concentrated fire, leaving the ship turning helplessly in a slow widening circle. Another transport erupted into secondary explosions as ammunition stores ignited, sending plumes of black smoke curling into the sky. The Imperial Japanese Navy tried to respond, but nothing in its playbook accounted for this. Gun crews were cut down before they could fire. Maneuvers meant to counter torpedo planes left ships broadside to strafing runs. Destroyers attempting to shield transports only made themselves clearer targets. In less than 15 minutes, order gave way to chaos. Vessels drifted ablaze, their wakes fading into a sea marred by burning oil. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea had entered its decisive moment, and the shape of future warfare was now unmistakable. When the gunfire finally began to fade, the shape of the disaster revealed itself across the water. What had started that morning as an orderly formation, a convoy bound for Leh with the confidence of years of experience behind it, now lay scattered in pieces across miles of burning sea. Columns of smoke coiled upward from ruptured hulls. Lifeboats drifted half-shattered, and everywhere, the silence between explosions told the same story. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea had turned from a mission of reinforcement into a mass grave. The transports were the first to succumb. Packed with soldiers of the 51st Division, many never made it to the decks. Skip bombs had torn open the holds, letting water pour into compartments never designed for rapid escape. Survivors later recalled the muffled pounding of men trapped below, a sound quickly drowned by the rising seawater. Of the 6,900 troops who set out from Rabaul, fewer than 1,200 would ever reach Leh, and almost none arrived in a condition to fight. A division meant to change the balance in New Guinea had been broken before firing a single shot on land. The destroyers fared little better. Those not sunk outright were left adrift, their superstructures opened by 50 caliber fire from the B-25 Mitchell Strafer. The Imperial Japanese Navy had long prided itself on the skill of its gunners, but that pride dissolved under the reality of air power delivered at point-blank range. Bridge crews lay motionless where they had stood moments earlier. Fire control stations were carved apart. Communications broke down, and without coordination, even the most seasoned officers could only watch as their ships succumbed to flooding and fire. For the Japanese sailors who survived, the psychological aftermath proved as devastating as the physical destruction. Many described the attack as a kind of mechanical inevitability, a force of metal and velocity that left no room for courage or skill. The 8 blazing muzzles of a B-25 Mitchell Strafer became a recurring image in post-war testimonies, a vision of a weapon that erased the boundaries between sky and sea, between offense and defense. Some survivors spoke of diving into the water, believing they had escaped, only to hear engines roaring back for another strafing pass. The Pacific War had produced countless horrors, but few encounters left such deep scars. Strategically, the consequences were immediate and severe. Reports reaching Rabaul and then Tokyo forced a reckoning within the Imperial Japanese Navy. Convoy doctrine, once a pillar of Japanese operational planning, was no longer viable within range of American airfields. Surface resupply during daylight hours became all but impossible. Destroyers were reassigned to nighttime Tokyo express runs, but these could carry only a fraction of the supplies needed to sustain garrisons scattered across New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. Units that had once relied on steady reinforcement found themselves starving, sick, and increasingly isolated. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked a turning point not because of its scale, but because of its implications. A fleet that had sailed with confidence guided by tradition discovered that innovation, bold, improvised, and relentless, could erase an entire operational plan in minutes. And in that moment, the Pacific War shifted irreversibly toward the side that adapted fastest. From the American perspective, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea became more than a tactical victory. It became proof that ingenuity, when paired with urgency, could rewrite the rules of war. The transformation of the B-25 Mitchell into a low-altitude gunship was not the product of a design bureau or a formal doctrine. It emerged from mechanics working under corrugated roofs in Australia, pilots demanding tools that matched the realities of the Pacific War, and commanders willing to discard tradition in favor of results. In many ways, the B-25 Mitchell Strafer was the embodiment of wartime adaptation, fast, brutal, and tailored to the environment in which it fought. American strategists quickly recognized what the engagement signaled. If a convoy as heavily escorted as the one destroyed in the Battle of the Bismarck Sea could be erased in minutes, then Japan's ability to project power or sustain distant garrisons had entered a terminal decline. Air supremacy no longer meant merely contesting the sky. It meant severing the arteries that kept enemy armies alive. Skip bombing, once an experiment, became a standard technique. Air groups from the 5th Air Force and the Royal Australian Air Force refined it until striking ships became a science measured in altitude, angle, and nerve. Beyond the Pacific, the implications traveled fast. Allied observers in Europe studied reports from New Guinea and marveled at an aircraft that could deliver more forward firepower than many naval vessels. Axis analysts, German, Italian, tried to emulate the concept but rarely achieved the dense concentration of 50 caliber fire that made the B-25 Mitchell Strafer so devastating. The lesson was clear. Mobility and firepower, when fused in a single platform, could render traditional naval defenses obsolete. For Japan, the global meaning was more painful. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once the pride of an island empire, had been forced to confront a new category of threat, one born not from battleships or torpedo bombers, but from field modifications and tactical creativity. Officers writing after the war would admit that the Battle of the Bismarck Sea marked the moment they realized their naval strategy was collapsing faster than it could be repaired. In the broader sweep of the Pacific War, the battle stands as a testament to how innovation can shift not only a campaign, but the strategic imagination of nations watching from thousands of miles away. When the smoke finally drifted away from the water and the last echoes of gunfire faded into the wind, the Bismarck Sea returned to its vast, indifferent calm. Wreckage settled beneath the waves, carrying with it the stories of men who had never reached the shore they were destined for. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was over in minutes, yet its consequences rippled far beyond that quiet stretch of ocean. What had occurred there was not simply the destruction of a convoy. It was the unraveling of an idea that tradition alone could shield an empire in the Pacific War. For Japan, the loss carved a wound deeper than the ships that were claimed by the sea. The Imperial Japanese Navy had entered the battle believing it understood the nature of aerial warfare. But the B-25 Mitchell Strafer, armed with forward-firing guns and empowered by skip-bombing tactics, revealed a truth they had not anticipated. Innovation can arrive from directions doctrine never considers. The devastation forced Japan to abandon daylight resupply, to break its own strategic rhythm, and to confront the limits of an empire stretched thin across vast ocean distances. For the Americans and Australians who fought there, the battle became something else, a demonstration of what ingenuity can accomplish when necessity demands speed, courage, and imagination. The lessons of the B-25 Mitchell Strafer lived on long after the Pacific War ended. They shaped the development of post-war gunships, influenced tactical aviation thinking, and proved that transformative ideas often come not from laboratories, but from men working beside the dust and noise of frontline workshops. Yet beneath all the strategic meaning lies a quieter truth. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea reminds us that every innovation, every breakthrough, comes with a cost measured in human lives. The soldiers trapped in the holds of sinking transports, the sailors clinging to burning wreckage, the air crews who flew into dense fire at wave height, each carried a story that ended in those waters. And so we are left with a question that still resonates today. In a world where warfare evolves faster than doctrine, what responsibility do we bear to understand the lessons left behind? If you believe the history of the Pacific War still has something to teach us about courage, about adaptation, about the fragility of empires, consider joining us as we continue exploring these stories. Your voice, your insight, and your reflections keep this history alive.